Welcome to everyone to the Artemis 3 Science Definition Team Town Hall. This is the second Town Hall that we've had for the Science Definition Team. Hopefully you have all had a chance to look at the draft report that has been posted online and are able to make some feedback on the report. This is another way that you can give feedback. So there were some questions that were submitted in advance. Those questions will be asked, or at least some of those questions will be asked today during the town hall, but you also have the opportunity during the town hall to ask questions through the chat box. So the way this will work is that we'll have a presentation at the beginning from Sarah Noble and Renee Weber, and then we'll launch into the Q&A portion. So I'll remind you after the presentation is complete, but please use the chat box for your questions during the presentation and during the rest of the town hall. And then I will also be pulling in some questions that were submitted earlier before the town hall began. Please make sure that you are muted so that we don't get the extra clicking from participants, and that will help things run very smoothly. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Noble to get us started.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you all for joining us, whether you're here live or watching this later on tape. We do really appreciate the participation from the community through these town halls, through the white papers that you've submitted, and through the feedback that we hope we're going to get from you between now and Monday. The feedback is due Monday at 5 p.m. So please get that in. We do really want to hear from the community. I also want to take a minute to thank Survey and LPI for the support that they've been giving us through this process and setting up these town halls and whatnot. Thank you guys. You are a lifesaver for us. And then I just want to take a minute here to sort of introduce the SDT and a little bit of background before I turn it over to Renee. I guess I should also introduce myself. Most of you know me. If you don't, I'm Sarah Noble. I'm the lead for lunar science within the Planetary Science Division of the Science Mission Directorate. Next slide, Renee. So here you go. This is sorry, all of your pictures are over the words and I can't read them. This is what the terms of reference for the SDT defined as what the SDT will do. They are to define compelling and executable science objectives for the Artemis 3 mission. I'll note here that science objectives refers to the science direct objectives that fall under the Science Mission Directorate of NASA. So not everything that you could possibly do on the moon that is science falls into that. For example, human research falls under the Human Research Program in the Human Exploration Directorate at headquarters. So that was excluded from this. This is basically focusing only on things that would fall under SMD because it's an SMD chartered SDT. They are to assess the objectives for the mission to achieve the science goals articulated by NASA, including investigation approaches, key surface science activities, and potential inputs into the concepts of operations, and then to submit a final report to the Planetary Science Division containing prioritized science objectives for all the aspects of the Artemis 3 mission, including sampling strategies, science goals, and priorities of deployed instrument packages. I also want to note that they are looking at investigations here. They were told specifically not to go into specific types of instruments. That is TBD for later. Their job was to tell us what science we are to do under Artemis 3. Next slide. And then this is the team. And I just want to say thank you to every person on this list because it has been an incredible amount of work already, and I am very impressed with how far they have already gotten. There's still a couple more weeks to go, and I just want to sincerely thank everybody on this list for all of the work that they have put into this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee, our chair.
Thanks, everybody. So just to give an update on the schedule that was first presented at the league meeting back in September. We're meeting weekly to work towards these milestones, and we're doing pretty well. We're on track. The draft report was released only one day later than anticipated, and we'll be accepting written feedback on the report through October 26th, which is next Monday. So after that, the last milestone is to submit the final report. So I hope, as you've all now seen, the draft report is indeed public. It's available at these links, and it consists of these contents. You got a hot mic. So we're going to walk through these sections together, but before we begin, I want to point out one very important thing. This is a draft report. It really reflects the status of the SDT deliberations at this moment in time. Some sections are still subject to further deliberation. In particular, the executive summary, which is section 1, the section on cross-objective commonality, section 6, and our section on findings and recommendations will all be written once we have incorporated community feedback that we get today during this town hall and also during the written feedback process. And then lastly, a lot of the back matter, like the references and the appendices and just general typesetting of the report, are also incomplete, but will be finalized likewise in the next couple of weeks. So to reiterate what Sarah mentioned at the beginning, the science definition team was tasked with summarizing material from these sources. So we are not reinventing the wheel when it comes to science on the moon. We're pulling from these community consensus documents, the first being the League Lunar Exploration Roadmap, also the SCEM report, the scientific context for the exploration of the moon, the League Special Action Team report presented as an update to the SCEM report called Advancing Science of the Moon, which was intended to address the subsequent decade worth of lunar science advances and where we stand with respect to the established objectives laid out in the SCEM report. And then finally, the Planetary Decadal Survey, as well as the community submitted white papers. We received 124 white papers. Those are actually all public, available online now at the LPI link, and hopefully somebody can paste the link in the chat for me, or I'll do it when I'm done with the presentation. So we've engaged, as an SDT, we've engaged in a traceability exercise to identify the key science goals and objectives from these documents that can be achieved with the Artemis 3 mission. And the goals that we have identified trace onto the science objectives that were laid out in the Artemis plan provided by HEOMD. So the prioritization process for investigations, which I'll get to in a minute, was in part driven by the architectural implications of the Artemis 3 mission. And those include science utilization down mass, up mass, and EVA capability. You can read about these capabilities in detail as part of the solicitation for the human landing system. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about it. There's a link if you want to go read that. But I have pulled a few important points that are relevant for our activity. First, we expect Artemis 3 to be a 6.5-day surface mission with up to 5 EVAs lasting between 4 and 8 hours, which will consist of 2 crew walking on foot with no additional surface mobility. We expect HLS to be able to deliver 100 kilograms of scientific payload to the surface, which includes the sample containers, sample collection tools, cameras, and other science experiments, which are still TBD. One important point is that the current down mass capability of HLS isn't finalized, and it could exceed this amount. For up mass, the goal is likewise 100 kilograms with a threshold of 35 kilograms, which ensures that samples are prioritized for return to Earth. And again, while HLS may end up exceeding the goal for up mass, the limiting factor is the capability of the Orion spacecraft, upon which both the astronauts and samples return to Earth. So we're going to talk about how these factors were considered during the science prioritization in a few moments. So as a reminder, these are the 7 objectives, the 7 Artemis science objectives taken from the Artemis plan that drive our exercise. Understanding planetary processes, understanding the character and origin of lunar volatiles, interpreting the impact history of the Earth-Moon system, revealing the record of the ancient sun and our astronomical environment, observing the universe and the local space environment from a unique location on the moon, conducting experimental science in the lunar environment, and investigating and mitigating exploration risks. So the SDT was charged with expanding upon these objectives, which were first laid out in the Artemis plan. And to do so, we chose to map science goals or areas of research down to science investigations, which are specific activities undertaken to address goals. So this slide here outlines our prioritization process. This is a preliminary process, and I want to also remind everyone that it's not an independent process. We used prioritization from our guiding documents where available, as well as adjudicated community inputs, both from the white papers, from the lunar surface science workshops that have been ongoing. And part of the purpose of the town hall today is to request feedback on this process, which will ultimately drive development of the science program for Artemis 3. So the SDT undertook prioritization at the investigation level, and we ranked each investigation on 2 independent criteria, which mirror the process used in our guiding documents. The first is on science priority. So how fundamental or compelling is the science investigation towards making a significant scientific advancement? And the second is on whether Artemis 3 presents a uniquely enabling opportunity, given the architectural implications that I mentioned earlier. So we used a stoplight format for ranking. Science priority was given as high, medium, or low. And we stipulate that low does not mean a particular investigation is not worth doing, just that it was not regarded as a driving factor for this exercise. And then whether the opportunity was enabled by an Artemis 3 was given as yes, maybe, or not at this time. So in this case, maybe means yes with modifications. For example, if we had surface mobility or if we had access to a specific site or feature. And then not at this time would indicate that a particular investigation might better be achieved in the future when there is significant infrastructure and or Artemis Base Camp exists, or else it may require a non-polar landing site. So investigations that came up green during this process will provide the driving constraints on our field campaign. But we note that not making green doesn't stop consideration of a particular investigation. So I've just given a few examples here. The full traceability is in the back of the report, so you can download and look at every single one of our goals and investigations. The next section in the report is one of the blank sections that doesn't exist yet, focusing on cross-objective commonality. So this is the section where we will eventually provide a cohesive summary of commonality among our established objectives. In some cases, a single investigation can address multiple goals and objectives. And most of the objectives within the mission have synergies both with each other and objectives from other mission directorates. Some of those include the importance of sample acquisition and handling, the importance of establishing long-lived experimental stations on the surface, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The feed-forward aspects of the science discoveries made by Artemis 3 towards understanding lunar resource potential, the commercial development strategies and resource utilization efforts, and then the applicability of our results, of the science results from Artemis 3 towards future Artemis missions, the Artemis Base Camp, and exploration of other destinations, including small bodies and Mars. So in section 7, we also addressed several enabling capabilities that could dramatically enhance the return of Artemis 3, the science return. That includes power, which would help enable long-lived deployed science experiments, the ability to pre-deploy additional assets before crew arrive on Artemis 3, and as well as the ability to have surface mobility in the form of an unpressurized lunar rover, for example, which could be something that is part of a pre-deploy capability. Other enabling capabilities that we haven't included yet, but probably will at least look at, could include, for example, cryogenic sampling systems, as well as any other things that come up in discussion today. In section 8, we also include some cartographic recommendations, recognizing that landing humans near the South Pole and supporting operations during Artemis 3 is going to require the use of multiple lunar data sets from recent orbital missions. And so we really point out in this section how it's essential that our products all use standardized and clearly defined geodetic information, consistent reference frames and coordinate systems, and cartographic products with known levels of accuracy and precision. And we'll have some recommendations in the report on this as well. So a brief word on landing sites. This is something that has come up a lot, but I wanted to point out, and I put it in bold here, that the selection of a landing site for the Artemis 3 mission is outside the scope of the activities of this SDT, and authority really lies with HEOMD. Nevertheless, the scientific investigations that will be enabled by the Artemis 3 mission will, of course, be very closely linked to the geology of the chosen landing site. So accordingly, the SDT will suggest factors to be considered in the site selection process in order to fully inform the ultimate selection of the landing site, separately from operational concerns like block abundance, crater frequency, and slope. So some of the things that we've included so far are illumination, the availability of craters, access to a variety of samples, blocks, age units, access to permanently shadowed regions, and sort of TBD based again on community input. So again, I'll point out the site selection authority ultimately lies with HEOMD, who are one of the stakeholders in this SDT activity. And there will be an opportunity for additional input into that process that is still TBD and will not be part of this SDT. So to wrap up, before we open up to questions, I just wanted to point out some of the next steps for the science definition team, as well as the actions our stakeholders will take with our report. So in the next 2 weeks, the science definition team plans to summarize the community input that we received and the feedback on the report that we received, and further deliberate on the prioritization I just discussed. We hope to synthesize the science requirements for our final set of prioritized investigation into an Artemis 3 field campaign, consisting of compelling and executable investigations, and then produce findings and recommendations in the final report describing said campaign. So once the report is complete, we anticipate that SMD will use this report to define and scope instrument calls for both deployed and astronaut utilized payloads, and then use the report also to ensure that NASA Curation is fully prepared to accept and process the samples to be returned by Artemis 3, and also use the report to inform the generation of mission enabling data products. SMD will also use the report as a foundation for communication with HEOMD on development of exploration capabilities and mission requirements, again, identifying landing site figures of merit and informing the cross-agency recommendation process on site selection, and interfacing with other stakeholders on surface activities. So that includes the Human Research Program, STMD, and planetary protection. So again, the activities of this SDT are not the only way to provide input on landing sites. There will be other TBD opportunities. So I'm going to end with the reminder that the draft report will be open for comments until the 26th. It's available at these links. This top link is where the white papers are also available. I encourage everybody who has feedback that they very strongly want us to see to use the online submission form for comments, because that will be the easiest way for us to synthesize input and factor it in for consideration for factoring into the report. The questions that are available are fairly open-ended. We hope that we have convinced you that the report defines compelling and executable science objectives, We ask you to identify what, if anything, is missing. So do you agree about the goals and investigations? Do you agree with our enabling capabilities? Do you agree with our landing site considerations? And do you have any other feedback? And so with that, I think at this time we can open to questions, and I'll just leave the questions up and turn it over back to Amy.
Thanks, Renee. So as a reminder for everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll be moderating those. So we do have a few questions though, dealing with mobility. Jake, are you on that you'd be able to respond to those questions?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you see the chat box to see them, or do you need me to read them to you?
I am. Why don't you read them to me, then I know exactly what I'm addressing.
Okay. Has the team considered a concept of operation for Artemis 3 that would include landing the mission near a pre-deployed CLPS lander that would provide additional experiment and hardware? Could this be part of a recommendation to the program? So that's the first question.
I would not say that's outside of the trade space. You know, we're looking to this report to tell us what science needs to be done. If that requires more payload than can be delivered from HLS, then potentially a CLPS lander would be another way to complement that and try to get that hardware to the surface. The first thing we need to do, though, is understand what experiments need to go, what the payloads are that address those experiments, and you know, hopefully that traces to high priority science that's coming out of this report. So, you know, we will consider the options that are needed to do the job that we need to do. But I also want to kind of reiterate, you know, Artemis 3 is the first step in a pathway towards ever increasing capability. So, you know, I know that there's a urge to want to try to fit everything into an Artemis 3 landing and activities around that lander. But keep in mind that we have a plan that shows a cadence of landings following that will continue to have increased capability. So this is not a one-off only chance to try to address that science.
Okay, we have a related question. What drives the constraint that there will be no surface mobility augmentation, i.e. an LRV or LTV for Artemis 3? Is it possible for the science definition team to point out in the report the limitations associated with this constraint? Specific limitations apply to some of the specific science objectives. And then as part of that, there was then another question about what is the radius of travel for walking EVAs, as well as the target total mileage.
Okay, so the first,
yeah, mobility, surface mobility augmentation was the first part.
Yeah, so, you know, we are doing everything we can to meet the goals that we were given, landing on the surface by 2024. Again, I will stress the point that we envision increasing capability as we move forward. We have to deal with real budgets and hardware development timelines in order to get those pieces on the surface. Our plan right now is to have a unpressurized rover in place for the Artemis 4 and subsequent landings. You can certainly put into this report that you would like mobility capability for Artemis 3. But I think the report is also, you know, trying to be set up in a way that it will highlight what of that science can be addressed when those capabilities come online in subsequent missions.
Yeah, and I'll add that that was something we did consider during the prioritization process. It would be a medium priority in that, yes, it could be enabled by Artemis 3 if we had mobility. We have pointed that out in the enabling capabilities section.
Okay, and then Amy, the next question was regarding what is the radius for traveling for Artemis 3, is that correct?
Yes, the radius of travel for the walking EVAs as well as the target total mileage.
So those questions very much depend on the final capabilities and total duration of time that we'll have on the surface based on the contractors and which one is the final select for Artemis 3. So I can't give a firm number or a definitive answer on that. What we anticipate is being able to travel between hundreds of meters and 1 to 2 kilometers away from the lander. Now, saying that that's a true radius away from the lander, I don't want to mislead anybody. That might not be true. It all depends on factors such as consumables and being able to get back to that lander. So, you know, what we've been saying here and what was presented in the slides is considering hundreds of meters out to 1 to 2 kilometers.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Let's see. We've got a question about, could you give a clearer definition of science priority for the trace matrix? Right now it reads science priority is given as high, medium, low. We stipulate that low doesn't mean a particular investigation is not worth doing, just that it is not regarded as a driving factor. Driving factor for what aspect? Crew time, landing site. What is the definition of high? Is it something that's a driving factor or something that's been deemed one of the top priorities in lunar science?
So we had to pool the guiding documents for identifying what the highest priority science investigations or science objectives, I should say, are. For example, if something is highlighted as very high priority in the decadal, we absolutely must address this science question before we can advance any of our other goals focusing on this investigation, then that would rank it higher. What is going to drive the biggest science return? What are the big questions from the guiding documents collectively? So we didn't rely on any one individual report, and sort of had to make a call as scientists representing expertise in lunar science on how to rank the science priority. And again, I want to point out that, you know, part of the feedback process is to accept additional input, especially if it's drawn from these community guiding documents, with alternate assessments. We are willing to consider alternate assessments. And of course, I would open the same question for feedback from any of the other SDT members online who all played a part in this process.
All right, we have another question here. Are the recommendations for Artemis 3 or for all of the Artemis missions through the establishment of the Artemis base camp as described in section 2.1 of the draft report?
Yeah, so this exercise focuses specifically on Artemis 3, but I believe will absolutely be relevant as a building block that future SDTs for future Artemis missions can start with. And in fact, you may have noticed that we tried to preserve lettering and such that future Artemis missions can just take our original SDT and STM and update the assessment based on capabilities of the Artemis mission under consideration at the time.
I'll point out, if you read section 2.1 of the report, it actually reads pretty clearly that the overall science objectives as defined in the Artemis science plan are relevant for the entire Artemis program up to and including the base camp. It's in, I think, the third paragraph of that section, but this specific report is how those objectives and what are those objectives and to what fidelity can be achieved on the Artemis 3 mission itself as a solitary standalone event.
All right, we've got a question here. The draft report states that ISRU is outside the scope of the Artemis 3 science definition team. Where is the applied geoscience needed to enable successful ISRU captured, if not in the science definition plan?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The draft report states that ISRU is outside the scope of Artemis 3 science definition team. Where is the applied geoscience needed to enable successful ISRU captured? If not, where is that captured if it's not in the science definition plan? So I think the question is, where does ISRU fit if it's not, if it's specified as being outside the scope of the Artemis 3 science definition team?
Yeah, I can speak up for that briefly here. This is Jake Bleacher again. So that largely falls under TMD, Space Technology Mission Directorate, and they have in place an institute called LSIC that is being run by APL at this time. And they actually recently just had a workshop talking about surface environment, and ISRU falls underneath that bucket. So largely that comes out of the STMD area. And I would encourage you to maybe, if you're interested in that area, engage with that community. I know they recently had their own workshop. So that's certainly a starting point to communicate that information.
We do have sections that I think are sort of hooks for the ISRU community. And while they may not have followed out as high priority as part of our ranking process, there will at least be a summary to provide that hook in the report.
All right, let's see. We've got, I believe that the sharp boundary between the shaded and sunlit surface near the polar region is subject to potentially large electrostatic discharge. This is due to plasma flow along the surface having different properties than near the equator. Is this being considered as a potential hazard for astronauts?
This is Mike Collier. I'd like to address that. I did include a brief answer in the comment section if people want to take a look at that, but the answer is yes, absolutely. The polar landing site for Artemis 3 makes it particularly good for studying the effect you just talked about, because the plasma conditions will be similar to those near the terminator region, and you can examine things like potential differences between the lit and the shaded regions. So I think that's what you bring up should be in the report, I believe is in the report, and is an important aspect, I think, of Artemis 3. And science investigations along those lines are particularly well suited for Artemis 3. So I think it was Gunther who submitted that comment. So please take a look at what is currently in the report and provide feedback. I presume the best way to do that is using the online submission tool.
Yes, and we did in fact highlight at least two, maybe more, prioritize 2 investigations addressing that topic. One under heliophysics and one under risk mitigation.
Yeah, that's right. And the part of this is that, especially with the lunar electrodynamics topic, sometimes they could fall under 2 different objectives. I mean, for example, your question emphasized the hazards aspect, but again, there is this more general question of the field configuration and the potential configuration that's affected by the light-dark transition, which is an important problem independent of the potential hazards aspect. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, I'm going to take a question actually from the pre-submitted questions, and then we'll come back to people in the chat box. So give me just a moment, please. All right, Renee, I know you addressed very briefly some of the mass, but one of the popular questions that's been upvoted is what is planned concerning the mass and types of materials for sample return in Artemis 3 and for later missions? For those people who maybe came in a little bit later, I think this is something that a lot of people are interested in. Can you highlight that again?
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 parts to that question. One is the actual just mass capabilities of the lander. And the other is, okay, given those constraints, which particular samples do you want to go pick up? And we will attempt to address that once we finalized our prioritized investigations in the cross-objective commonality section. And so I think the answer, I don't remember if the question was will we or how will we, but if it's will we, the answer is yes. And if the question was how will we, it will be using community input and using our finalized prioritized list of investigations.
Okay, we'll take another one from the chat window. Has there been any discussion of success criteria for these science objectives as they relate specifically to Artemis 3?
No, we haven't talked about that.
All right, what is the decision process for selection of scientific samples, and how will the samples be identified prior and during the collection process on the moon?
So that's venturing into ConOps, and we won't be actually writing a ConOps, but may be making recommendations for a ConOps. So to the extent that such pieces of information are necessary, as we write up our campaign, they will be included.
Let's see, there's a question about the ranking of astrophysics. There's strong overlap in the top science priorities, like measuring environmental monitoring and testing exploratory technologies for long-term astrophysics detectors. Will that be included in the report? Excuse me, astrophysics detectors such as lunar-based gravitational waves. Will that be included in the report? So I think there's a question of where astrophysics is lying in the report.
About the ranking?
In terms of the ranking, and then where some of the overlap is there going to be overlap with environmental monitoring and testing exploratory technologies?
So I can't comment on the overlap offhand. I do know that we have sections in the report focused on gravitational experiments. We did receive white papers on that topic, so they have been considered. And again, the prioritization falls out as a result of our ranking process. And so if there's additional feedback that would argue for a different science prioritization, we would love to receive that through the written feedback channel.
Okay, let's see, making sure I was still unmuted. There was a question that was submitted earlier about investigations for the effects of rocket exhaust, especially for polar regions and for massive landers, and where that would lie in the report, where that would be taken into account.
Yes, so we do have a section in the report considering investigations for things like rocket exhaust. One of the investigations is focused on understanding the impacts of human exploration on the lunar volatile record in particular across the surface. So we do address and cover such aspects of lunar exploration, and that includes rocket exhaust from human scale landers as an example, and also encompasses other things.
All right, we have a follow-up question on the use of CLIPS program during the Artemis missions. Is the synergy between the two programs, HLS and CLIPS, being planned at this time to support crew science activities on the surface?
So I think that might be a question for Jake.
For Jake, yeah.
Yes, and I apologize. I was typing a message into the chat window. Could you please repeat that, Amy?
Sure. It's a follow-up question on the use of CLIPS program during the Artemis missions. Is the synergy between the two programs, HLS and CLIPS, being planned at this time to support crew science activities on the surface?
From the HEO perspective, we view CLIPS as a possible mechanism to deliver any of the hardware that we need to get there. I know also that SMD looks at it as a delivery mechanism to potentially get hardware for science experiments. From an agency perspective, we view that as one of the options that can overall support Artemis. So, right now we're focused on getting the things we need to get in place for Artemis 3, but we do have discussions routinely between the directorates about how CLIPS could be used to support these goals.
Yeah, and the report will include recommendations on pre-deploy.
Okay, there was a question earlier that I want to highlight again, just to remind people, but the question was, is there room for additional recommendations for science investigations that may not be in the draft science definition team report? And yes, we are encouraging feedback in that field as well. So I did want to make sure that that is reiterated multiple times. We have another question that just came in. A lunar human physiology lab has been identified to study lunar G as an intermediate stress level to assist Martian G countermeasures. What provisions are being planned for future Artemis missions?
So the human research program within HEOMD, that's where questions like that would fall under. And my understanding from Jake is that they will have a parallel prioritization process similar to what we're undertaking on behalf of SMD, but that particular investigation is outside the scope of this particular effort.
Additionally, they have working groups that engage the community broadly, publicly, from which they also host these types of discussions. So I'll look up that information and try to get that posted in the chat window as well.
Okay, I know we've had a lot of ISRU questions and comments, so I wanted to hand it over to Jen Heldman to address some of those. Jen?
Sure, thanks, Amy. I'm assuming you can hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, so I appreciate the comments that have come in regarding ISRU, Clive and Julie et al. Making the point that we don't want ISRU considerations to fall through the cracks between SMD and STMD. So I just wanted to point out, like in this report, we do recognize, the mantra that science enables exploration and exploration enables science. So if you look in objective 2, hopefully everyone can go and review that. That's understanding the character and origin of the volatiles. We did consider ISRU in that, and it's in the text as one of the considerations. And it turns out that a lot of those science objectives are also high priority for characterizing the form, the distribution, the abundance of the volatiles, which is key, of course, for ISRU as well. And then also included in objective 2 is understanding the origin of the volatiles, the transport processes, retention timescales, et cetera. And that's also important for ISRU because we need to know that to be able to develop predictive models for where these potential resources or reserves may be. So I just wanted to make sure that this will be reflected in the cross-objective commonality where science investigations are applicable to other entities, in this case ISRU. So trying to make sure that that bridge is gapped and that we don't lose that, and making the point that yes, there are a lot of investigations that are important for science, but will also have high applicability, in this case, to the ISRU world.
And this is Barbara. Can I just follow on to Jen's comment? Not only did we try to address it to some extent in these goals, but there's also a NASA Lunar Water ISRU Measurement Study, or LWIMS, that has gone on for about a year. That's totally separate from this study. They're just about done, but there is an interim or a brief report in an LPSC abstract that I connected to in the group chat if you're interested in that.
Okay, Caleb, would you be able to verbally respond to some of the gravimetry questions that we've had?
No, somebody raised the idea that gravimetry would be a particularly interesting way of perhaps looking at the regolith around the landing site. And I just basically said in the chat, yeah, I agree, but we're focused on investigations and not necessarily the specific measurement implementation of how to get those investigations. So yeah, look in the report in the chat for more.
Thanks. Okay, several more things about ISRU. I'm gonna grab one more thing from the previously submitted questions. There was a question about the white papers released. So if you weren't on at the beginning, yes, those have been released. I can put the link in the chat box so you can see that as well. And those white papers were used in developing the report. There was a question here about what measures are going to be in place to mitigate radiation exposure concern on the lunar surface, and what measurements are going to be made with that.
Yeah, I'll take that, and it's gonna sound like an answer I've already given, but we have several technology pathways in development on this. We have considered multiple options. We have plans for that, but again, we don't have finalized decisions on that. So we will work our way towards those solutions. Rest assured that they're being worked on, and you know, again, we have to see what the final capabilities of the vehicles are that are going to be decided on to go to the surface, and they will be integrated in there.
Sorry, forgot that I was on mute. There's a question that was submitted in advance that was asking about the lunar science for landed missions report and how that might fit in with the science definition team report.
Yes.
In terms of a useful document.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Lunar Surface Science Workshop, or Lunar Science for Landed Missions Workshop that I remember, identified science investigations that could be carried out at a given site. And I hope that the investigations that we have identified encompass what was presented there, but it would be good to check.
So, Renee, so that particular report is referenced at least twice in the text, so we did not ignore it. I'm well aware of it. I heard it was the best meeting that it's ever been held. And, you know, it really does reflect a sense of community priorities. The South Pole is included in that report. The actual report itself is already referenced twice in the text. The fact that it wasn't listed in the giant laundry list that of reports that clearly demonstrate the value of the moon spanning 5 decades was an oversight on my part and will be corrected in the final report. So sorry about that.
Yep. Okay, there was another document in question of the National Academy report on strategic investments in instrumentation and facilities for extraterrestrial sample curation. And was this also included for consideration in the science definition team, or was it just, you know, we forgot to put it on the long list?
So we have representation from CAPTEM on the SDT. I don't know if Juliana is on right now, but if she is, I would ask her to comment on that. All right. I will make it a note that we discuss that with her during our next meeting.
All right, let's see. There's also a question that was submitted in advance about biology. There seem to be a couple of questions about biology and where that fits in the science definition team and the report and Artemis 3.
So if it relates to the human program, again, it's outside the scope. And if it relates to some of the EPS type investigations, it is included. Although I don't think many of those, if any of those investigations were prioritized for Artemis 3, but may become relevant in future missions.
Okay, let me see where we are now. There was a question about the study of the regolith and megaregolith around the Artemis landing site using ground penetrating radar. And if that is in the report, if not, then they'll add it in.
Yeah, so similar to Caleb's feedback from just a moment ago about gravimetry, sort of the same thing where it's, you know, we're going to talk about a measurement and not a particular instrument needed to make that measurement. But regolith investigations are included in the report, yes.
All right, just a moment as I try to check off ones that we have covered and see where the new ones are. Let's see, Christina, do you see any that I've missed? If not, then I'll go back to the ones that were submitted in advance.
Let me go, there's one, let me make sure it wasn't asked already.
Okay, while you're looking for that, there was a question in that was submitted in advance of the meeting about the priorities of the science traceability matrix, but we have discussed that already.
Oh, the prioritization process. Yeah,
Right.
I think we covered that.
Are there explicit plans to provide ground truth for the large data sets collected from lunar orbit?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that that's implicit with every surface investigation that we do. In some cases, the needed investigation does require synergy with orbital measurements, and probably in those cases, it should be explicitly pointed out.
So Amy and all, there were two questions that kind of relate to HRP, probably a little bit more than this, but maybe just to help people understand where they can go for this. There was one from Braided Communications, and I know you mentioned in passing HRP as a separate organization, but they asked, would it be possible to say more about why it was considered not possible to study and they're saying part of 7A, the mental effects of lunar exploration during Artemis 3. It's connected to the short amount of time available and prioritizing other objectives is their question. The experience of isolation and confinement is also connected to the communications and doing research to improve communication capacity.
And so the question was just related to our prioritization or whether it was considered?
Was it considered not possible to study the mental effects of the lunar exploration during Artemis 3? So I guess my point is this an HRP related question? Are they going to be integrating their own objectives to the Artemis 3? And maybe that's a question for Jake.
Is John on? John, was that captured in?
Renee, that's in my section. It's Noah.
Yeah,
here.
Noah.
So yeah, sorry. And John certainly can weigh in. We chatted a long time about this. You know, as much as it may fall into other disciplines within NASA, we do have it in the report. And, you know, again, keeping in mind the duration of Artemis 3, you know, we acknowledge that while you may be able to do an initial study, I think the essence of that goal is for a long duration mission. And many of the objectives in that section 7 are things that you could do the first steps of, you know, knowing that you're on the moon for a limited period of time, in deep space for a short period of time, relatively short period of time, compared to the quote long duration missions, long duration studies that most of those objectives aim for. So we do acknowledge that, you know, you can do the first step of that test, but it may not be the ideal test case for a long duration mission. Clearly you have to word it a little bit better in the document, but we do acknowledge that it's you know, something that could be done within the capacity of an Artemis 3 mission.
Okay, they put in a clarification. They're saying that in the table, mental effects is included in 7A, but labeled as not being possible within Artemis 3. I was asking to know more about why it's not possible. I think it's being answered right now. Okay, so we're good.
Hey, Renee, quick, this is Mike Collier, quick question, and maybe you've already done this, and if you have, I apologize for bringing it up, but would you be willing to post in the chat box the URL for the online submission of comments?
I can put all those in again.
Yeah, it's
okay. I appreciate it. As I said, I'm sure it went up, but we've lost it, and I'm getting some questions about it.
You can actually reach it from either of the two URLs that are on the screen right here.
Okay.
I'll add it into the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you kindly.
You're welcome. Let's see. Renee, I apologize that this has already been asked. This is rapid fire questions. So did we do the question of what is the decision process for selection of scientific samples, and how will the samples be identified prior and during the collection process on the moon? Did we cover that one?
Yes, we did.
Okay, apologies. All right. So let's go back to ones that have been asked in advance. We covered the ground truthing the data sets. There was a question about the weight and volume that the systems occupy, but that was covered in your initial presentation, I believe. Is that correct, Renee?
What systems?
That's all the question asks. I'm assuming that they are referring to the landing system and return of. Well, I don't know. The question says, how much weight and volume do these systems occupy?
Okay.
It was.
Well, yeah, I guess I'll just go back to the 100 kilogram down mass.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Okay, checking off ones that we have discussed. Here's one that I don't think we've covered yet. The MESSENGER mission obtained ionic spectra from the Hermian exosphere. This kind of study is being considered by the Artemis program, considering, for instance, the interaction and arising processes of lunar surface with solar wind, galactic cosmic rays, and micrometeorites. The ejection of particles, neutrals, and ionic may be important for the lunar exosphere and ionosphere formation. This study may be very important considering the first two science objectives of the program, understanding planetary processes and understanding the character and origin of lunar volatiles. So I think the question really is, will the Artemis program be considering a similar study as what was conducted by the MESSENGER mission in terms of the exosphere?
So we had, and Mike can maybe back me up on this, exosphere investigations as part of Objective 5, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit in the report about studying the lunar exosphere, in particular the pristine lunar exosphere. So studies like the one referenced could be very valuable in terms of addressing some of those types of issues that were raised in the report. As Renee said earlier, we eschewed in the report advocating particular techniques and focused on the science questions as a whole, but certainly exosphere and volatiles in general are addressed in the report and are I think an important focus.
Yeah. Both
and this is Jen, just to emphasize that looking at the exosphere is also in Objective 2 to understand the volatiles, so under 2E, so we can understand how volatiles are released and migrate to the poles and get absorbed. So one of the specific goals is to detect volatile species in the exosphere. So we have looked at that and it's included.
And it does, as the person who authored that question point out, tie into a lot of the planetary processes, how the source of the volatiles came to be there in the first place. Absolutely.
Okay, so Amy had to step away and go tend to some students. So I'm going to continue to ask some questions. It looks like we're continuing to go down the online submission. And so there was one, could the document identify which goals it can make significant progress on versus incremental? Would be more powerful as such?
I believe that's what it does.
Okay. And so let's move on. Is there consideration of astronaut-controlled small robotic rovers to expand the region around the landing site available for exploration?
So that hasn't come up. I could see it as a potential facet of enabling capabilities. I guess I would ask for clarification if that were a telerobotic thing, maybe while the crew are in orbit, or if it were intended to be something. I'm just curious for more details. I'm going to jot it down on my list.
Okay, well, let's put a call out. This system doesn't say who submitted it. So if that was your question, please submit feedback to the document feedback form so that Renee has a little more context and the committee can assess. Okay, So the next question is, this person is concerned that any human operations will swamp out signals related to most of investigation 2 on volatiles, those that deal with surface, oh, okay. But best chance for doing these goals, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a little bit more.
Yeah.
Best chance for doing these goals with Artemis is robotic sample collection and hermetically sealing prior to the Artemis landing. So it's, I guess, a statement more than a question, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we did actually address this partially when we were talking about looking at the effects of rocket exhaust. But understanding the impact of human exploration on the lunar environment is one of the objectives that we have highlighted. I'm sorry, one of the investigations that we have highlighted as high priority. And so this would absolutely be something that would be included in that consideration.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'd also give a quick plug for the Viper rover, who is explicitly going to do some of that characterization before the humans get there, but can mess everything up.
Yes, good, very good point. Okay, so this one is probably more for clarification for people. What is the mechanism by which the top tier choices for science exploration feedback to the requirements for power, infrastructure, et cetera requirements?
Can you say it again, Christina?
I can. What is the mechanism by which the top tier choices for science exploration feedback to the requirements for power, infrastructure, et cetera? I think they're really just trying to understand. My interpretation of this is maybe that power, infrastructure, and things like that aren't going to be included in this, but they're going to drive the requirements for power and infrastructure. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so the particular investigations may have a set of requirements that come with it, which we don't get into too much since we're not looking at specific investigation or specific instruments. We've mentioned that several times. However, there is some obvious requirements like long-lived power if you want to deploy instruments that take measurements for a long time. So yes, in that case, a long-term power source is a requirement to enable those types of investigations. So we as an SDT can make the recommendation that in order to achieve these high priority investigations that we have identified, because you asked us to, you, the decision makers that take our report, will have to actually make sure that that capability is provided if you agree with our assessment and want to do these investigations.
Okay. Okay, kind of back to volatiles a little bit. Here's one, just making a question and a point. EVA suits release water at a rate of approximately a half a kilogram per hour per a white paper by Lee et al. Is there a plan to address this in the activities regarding volatiles?
So that might be one for Jen or for Kelsey.
Sure, I can address that first. So we recognize that, and we did read there's a white paper, maybe 2 about that. So this is captured under 2F, understanding the impact of human exploration on the lunar volatile record. So specifically addressing that point. And then also the other point is this SDT was tasked with what science could we do with Artemis 3. So that does not preclude other missions. And as Sarah just said, we'll have the Viper mission that goes before. There will be CLIPS missions. The Prime 1 mission is going. So there will be other characterizations robotically without humans that are there. And so, yes, we have thought about it. I think, yes, it's reflected in the STM, in the draft report. And so it's on the radar.
Okay, great, thank you. And there's a question in the chat window going back to what you said, Sarah, regarding Viper. Is there any expectation that the Viper and Artemis 3 landing sites will be proximate to one another?
No, there's no intention of that. Neither Viper or Artemis 3 have decided on landing sites yet. They're still going through this process, and they have different requirements for what they're looking for in a landing site. But no, there is no intention that they will land in the same place. In fact, yeah, as Jen was just saying, it's great that we are going to lots of different places so that we can cross compare and correlate between them. And so I think that is the intention.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to go back to the conference submitted questions online, but I want to put a plug out for everyone. Oh, somebody just did. But could you please, if we missed your question in the chat window by chance, because Amy's right, we've been moving quickly. I've been trying to track some of the questions and where they're answered, but if we missed it, please re-enter it right now so that we can catch it, because the chat has slowed down a little bit. But Brad Jolliffe just wrote, I know that you've stated that landing site selection is outside the scope of the SDT report. However, science objectives are being evaluated independent of selection of a specific landing site. What will be the process for selecting a landing site, and when will that take place? And how will the SDT prioritization of science goals and objectives be translated once a specific site is selected? That is, how will science considerations be factored into site selection? Could perhaps use the traceability matrix to evaluate different landing sites from the perspective of science.
So I'll answer one small part of that question and then turn it over to Jake. But we do already have a section in the report where we make, recommendations not for a specific landing site, but for a specific feature or character of a landing site that you would need to achieve the high priority investigations that we laid out in the report. And so that section is there available for comment, and your comment could include additions if you would like to see additional factors on that list. We will consider those. I will have to submit to Jake to answer the rest of the questions about the process, because authority for that process does lie with HEOMD.
Yeah, Brad, and happy to chat about that briefly. Thank you for the question. Both Marshall Smith and myself mentioned at the recent league meeting, we were both asked this question. We believe in the final stages of searching for approval to finalize a process that will represent not only science objectives, but all of the necessary inputs into selecting a landing site for Artemis. That process will include, for instance, figures of merit that are science-based. We will need to have some traceability to why do we want to go to a place, not just can we make it there, can we land there, but why do we want to go there? So there will certainly be traceability, and this type of a process here, the science definition team process that we're going through right now, will certainly be a referenceable guiding document in that effort. I do also want to stress that as we discuss how this process will work, we are very much designing it in a way that there will be additional opportunity for community input. So don't feel that this SDT is your one and only shot at trying to get input into how that process will play out. So I've tried to say this when I answer questions, for the last couple years now. We're going through these steps, we're producing these documents. None of these things are written into a stone tablet. This is going to be a continually evolving process as we move forward. So we will certainly look to this document, look to past documents, just as this document is doing, as well as take into consideration additional new input from the community.
I was muted. Okay. So thank you for that. And let's see, Dennis, I'm not going to say it, Poulos, is there an overall Artemis science campaign that Artemis 3 will play into, or are we going to treat each Artemis mission as an independent event?
Sam, do you want to take that one?
Yep, sorry, had to unmute here. So if you read the report, hopefully you get the sense that this is an integrated program, or at least an integrated campaign. Artemis 3 is the first of a series of missions that will hopefully culminate in a sustained American presence at the South Pole of the Moon by the end of this decade. So this is one of the other themes we keep returning to, is that if we wind up not doing some science investigation on the first mission, on Artemis 3, the first lunar landing mission of the 21st century, then we can do it on Artemis 4. We can do it in Artemis 5. We can do it in Artemis 6. So this is all of them would be going to roughly the same location. So this is not your last chance to make an input. This will be an iterative process. It's described that way in the report. This will be an iterative process, each one building one upon the other.
And on to Sam's comment there, I think what your question is getting at, the overarching Artemis strategy versus the strategy for Artemis 3. Basically, these two things are being developed concurrently. This SDT is asked to specify Artemis 3, but as you can see in the draft document, there is a good bit of material in here that talks about what could be done beyond Artemis 3. So those two things are kind of being done in parallel at the same time, and Artemis 3 will be that first step in achieving that larger strategy as we move forward.
Okay, and Dennis has a follow-up question. Are all going to the relative same area, right? Or yes? Or is that undetermined as well?
The goal is to develop a base camp that we return to repeatedly. We do not know if that base camp will be the same location as we land the first time, or if it might be established in one of the subsequent landings. But ultimately, what we will achieve is identifying a location where we will begin to repeat and to put in place resources for future use.
Okay, thank you. Michael Nord stated in the chat window, requirements for living on the land, ISRU sustainability can be at cross purposes with science traceability requirements. How will we deal with this potential conflict?
I don't see it so much as a conflict as I see it as synergy. And we did talk about that a little before, particularly where the synergies lie in the volatile section of the report. And Jen commented on that earlier.
Okay, I'm going to put out a call for more questions. We do still have about 45 minutes allowed, or I should say allotted for questions and answered. Does anyone have additional questions?
While we wait for them to come in, I'll just reiterate that we would love to hear detailed written feedback if you didn't feel that your question was addressed, or if something came up as a result of this conversation. We have been looking and will look at all the feedback that we receive and consider it in the final report over the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. Submitted online was a mixture of questions about kind of non-HRP but biology topics, and one kind of made a comment about the SDT not having biologists, but I know that Kevin Sato is one of the ex officio members. Maybe there are other biologists I didn't recognize, but I guess this is a question for maybe Kevin or all of you, as to, we have HRP, we have the organization doing life sciences and general biology and physical sciences, and we have planetary sciences. So is life sciences doing a similar activity for their own work related to Artemis 3 and providing their own kind of guidelines?
So I'm not sure if Kevin's on. I unfortunately can't see the attendee list because I'm sharing my screen.
I will do a quick check here, maybe.
But to answer the question,
he is on. Let me ask him to unmute. Maybe Ricky, can you help Kevin if, oh, there he goes.
Sorry, my email, my whole internet went completely down just now, so I have no idea what's been going on.
Perfect timing.
So Christina, can you repeat the question for Kevin?
Yeah, so Kevin, there were some general questions about microbial, about non-HRP biology topics. And they're wondering, I know you're part of this SDT and you've contributed to this portion, but is there a similar document for the life sciences group and maybe physical sciences groups that will be submitted to HEO as well?
Not right now. We're all working through the SMD side.
Okay, so this, you're cutting out a little bit.
The thing that we've been doing. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So right now we're working through all of the standard HEO or SMD side to put all of our information in. The only thing that we're doing with HOMD is through the gateway, but that I know it's not associated with this. So this is really our first opportunity to begin to look at lunar surface and provide ground objectives.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I guess the upshot of the general questions about anything biology related is if people think something more should be included or addressed, they need to go put it in the document feedback form.
Yes, please do so. Yeah, we're getting inputs from everyone. We also had it sent out through the ASGSR to get more input on the biology, just because we joined late to this, just out of a necessity. So yeah, that'll be great. And I know that Sarah's been working on trying to get more of the physical sciences and the space biology side information and fundamental physics side to provide input to this document.
Yep, and there is, particularly with the fundamental physics side, there is some cross-objective commonality with some of the investigations for objective 1 for planetary processes. And
yeah, a little background that biological and physical sciences used to be part of HEO, and they very recently joined SMD. So we are getting to know our new friends and learning a lot about biology and physical sciences. But we are still coming up to speed. So please do provide us feedback if you are from those communities. We do want that feedback. So please submit.
Okay, and there was a comment that I'll read out that Lawrence Retman Young just added regarding biology representation. We also have the TRISH, Translational Research Institute for Space Health, as another resource available, and they have put some contact details in there. So if somebody wants to reach out to Rachel Dempsey, please do. Okay, so here's a new question. From Themo Grundman, is there a strategy to connect Artemis, and in particular Artemis 3 science, to other areas of the moon, i.e. north of 84 degrees south from orbit by robotic landers? Is the growing potential of small spacecraft or constellation-like approaches in such support missions considered?
So no.
I think I would point to the CLIPS program, which is our commercial lunar payload services program, which is taking small landers and landing them all over the moon. We have 2 going next year, 2 the year after, roughly 2 of those a year, going to locations around the moon, some to the pole, some not to the pole, and we intend to continue doing those. So I think we are, and they are becoming more and more capable as we go. We're working with these commercial companies to sort of develop their capabilities. Hopefully the idea is that NASA is just one of their customers, and that other customers as well can use them to send to the moon. So I think we'll be sending a lot of things to the moon.
Yeah, and I just want to add to Sarah's comment there. Artemis is really an overall lunar exploration endeavor, and it's not one mission directorate. This is an endeavor to explore the moon, and so I 100% agree with her. we are sending our astronauts to certain locations, as have been stated in the past, to take advantage of certain environmental conditions, resources that we may be able to take advantage of, which include potentially volatiles, other resources on the surface, as well as access to light, locations where we have light for greater than half the amount of time we'd be there. That helps us optimize our systems. But the astronauts themselves are not the end all be all of the Artemis program. And so what we'll learn from clips more globally about the moon is all part of that overall exploration strategy.
Christina, I see a question that I don't think's been asked yet. Is it okay if I jump in?
Please do. I was just jumping back.
Okay. Awesome.
Welcome back, Amy.
Thank you. Do you expect coordination with international partners of Artemis 3 on science definition?
So to the extent that white papers were submitted, we have. Perhaps Sarah could comment on what the process might be for SMD once the report is complete.
So we are coordinating with our international partners all the time on lots of things, Artemis and not Artemis. We're coordinating with them on clips, on bringing instruments on board through that process as well. Specifically, this SDT is a NASA product, and so they are not directly involved, but we're free to submit white papers or to participate in this town halls. We'd certainly accept their feedback along with anybody else's. But this is NASA's science definition team.
Okay. I don't see anything new in the chat. Oh, here's one that just came in. I also wanted to know that Artemis mission will also study about how resources available on Moon can protect the depletion of non-renewable sources on Earth. So I guess the question is, how can Artemis help to protect depletion of non-renewable sources on Earth? I think maybe is what's being asked. Or will Artemis missions help?
Well, I think I'll try to answer that. So I think, there's a lot of schemes out there. I mean, we've been thinking about what to do on the moon for 5 decades now. So there are a lot of schemes out there for how the cislunar economy and cislunar resources could dramatically, positively impact our life here on this planet and raise the economic standards around the world. Folks like David Criswell were saying this for years. This is an Artemis 3 science definition team report, so anything that's related to that mission, which is completely not going to establish those kinds of things on the lunar surface. So this is step 1 of a process, and I would anticipate over the coming decades we will start to use cislunar resources, but this is not going to be that. I'm not sure that, I think that's the best answer I can give you. It's outside the scope of the Artemis 3 mission.
Okay. There is another question that was submitted in advance. This is probably for our headquarters team, but do science definition teams typically have a public engagement strategy, or is this handed over to public affairs officers? I'm not sure if that's specifically just to the science definition team or to Artemis in general, but I think they're wondering about public engagement.
Yeah, we let the professionals deal with that, not the scientists.
I know this has been mentioned before, but can y'all go through or maybe Renee, if you could pull up the slide with what's going to happen in the future of, when do we need feedback from people? There have been a lot of really great things that have been submitted in the chat, and we need to make sure that y'all know when we need that information. So.
Yeah, the public comments for the report, the input on the survey webpage will close on Monday, the 26th, and we will synthesize and discuss it during our next meeting, which is next week.
Let's see. Will the recommendation for astrodecadal be considered for science definition team? Oh, and I'm sorry, Barbara, I see that you responded. The astrodecadal was an input, yes.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. I think we may have hit the questions.
Karen's following up. She wants to know if it's the latest from 2020 decadal or astrodecadal.
Yeah, that's not out yet.
Yeah, I didn't think it was either. I think it's anticipated early next year.
Yeah, John says Astro 2020 is still in work.
We definitely did use the previous one though.
Well, if we've reached the end of questions, I think what I would like to do is thank everyone for calling in. And I want to, one last time, encourage everyone to visit the place where feedback can be accepted. I have gotten a handful of folks that have emailed me directly, and while I definitely appreciate that, it'll be easier for the entire SDT to have access to your comments if you use the format that we've provided here. So please do that. We look forward to hearing from you. We thank everyone who called in today and who has been participating in the process so far, either via white paper or via the first town hall at the league meeting. This has been an intense process, a very quick moving process, and the input that we've received so far has been very, very helpful. So I want to thank everybody again. I want all of the SDT members to rejoin the Teams chat, and we still have 30 minutes left in our 2-hour window so that we can dive right into the feedback that we've got so far. So thank you, everyone, and I think this might be a good place to end if my hosts are in agreement.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again to Survey for hosting us. Appreciate it.